This TikToker just got sentenced to life in prison after building his whole career around exposing gang crime because, as it turns out, he wasn't just reporting on the game crime, he was in it. And what happened is that his crew ended up blowing up the wrong house.
These 3 men are now sentenced to prison for the bombing in Tumba. A mother lost both her legs and her 4-year-old daughter was seriously injured when a hand grenade was thrown into their bedroom in April of last year. The attack was actually aimed at a neighbor who had a drug debt, according to the prosecutor.
That is definitely not something you hear from a TikToker every day, but this one is out of Sweden. And if you're not from Sweden, this might come as a massive surprise to you. Because when you think gang violence and grenades, it's safe to say that Sweden probably isn't the first place that comes to mind. Well, unfortunately, it seems like this has been a huge ongoing problem there for years now. And we'll circle back to that, but for now, meet Joseph Said, who's 30 years old and he ran a TikTok account called Foxy Spy. He had a whole bunch of social media profiles, but a bunch of them have been deleted. But he built an audience by covering criminal gangs, which is basically just true crime commentary, but hyper-local, and specifically about the gang wars that are happening in his own country. And he positioned himself kind of as the guy who knew what was going on behind the headlines, except as it turns out, he didn't just know what was going on, he was apparently a part of it. So prosecutors say that Joseph wasn't just reporting on the criminal underworld from the outside looking in. He was embedded in it. And that's about to become extremely relevant. So according to prosecutors, this all traces back to an illegal deal that fell through. And the people on the buying end of that deal, I guess, were going to be punished for it. And by punished, I mean someone in Joseph's group decided the appropriate response to this bad illegal deal was a hand grenade. Yeah, that's totally not escalating things whatsoever. So the plan, as the prosecutors laid out, was to hit a house belonging to the people who'd been fined over the failed deal. And someone was apparently tasked with actually carrying out the attack. And that's where everything went sideways, because their target ended up being the wrong house, because the grenade was apparently thrown at a home where a mother and her young daughter were sleeping, not the people they were intending to hit, just the neighboring house. And the explosion was devastating. The mother's injuries were so severe that she ultimately lost both of her legs, and her daughter was also severely hurt.
I woke up to a bang, and then I got smoke from the fire into the vent leading to the bedroom. So I turn on the light and get up, and here the neighbor went over to check what it was and such. And I saw the fire truck. It's terrible that this happens in this calm, nice area where I've lived for 41 years. It feels very strange. The neighbor across saw this then. She got the smoke in her place, so she ran over and helped with the child there, and she told me this morning.
It seems to be a woman and her daughter who have been affected.
What are your thoughts about it? It's terrible that it happens, and maybe there are innocent people too. I think that's the worst part.
And just to be clear on their mistake as well, and just how careless all of this wasn't even a mix-up between like 2 different neighborhoods or some address typo or something like that. No, it was the house right next door to the one they were trying to hit. So according to court documents, the day after the explosion, Joseph Said, the TikToker who covers the criminal gangs, sent a message asking essentially how the attack could have possibly hit the wrong house. And that message ends up being a pretty big deal for the case, because it basically, confirmed in his own words that he knew about the operation and he expected a specific outcome that didn't happen. That was essentially the detail investigators needed so they could stop speculating of, maybe he was involved. So yeah, because of that message, essentially prosecutors knew exactly what that was supposed to be. But to make things even worse, this wasn't even the only attack connected to him either, because authorities also tied Joseph to a separate attack in Cetra, which also factored into his whole overall sentencing. So again, the dude who covers crime and criminal networks is actually a part of one and doing the crime himself. So I guess he really did have authority on what he was talking about on his channels. But regardless, once everything went to trial, it came out that Joseph hadn't actually thrown the grenade himself. He was out of the country when the attack happened, and the case against him was built around him being the one who ordered it. And for organizing that attack, combined with the Cetra case, he was sentenced to life in prison. And on top of that, he was not the only one facing consequences in total, because 5 men were sentenced in connection to all these attacks as well. So you have Philip Persson, who was 34. He was the guy who actually threw the grenade into the apartment, and he ended up being the one who confessed to it. He got 13 years and 10 months for 4 counts of attempting to take someone's life, alongside of serious public destruction and serious unlawful threats charges. Then you have Jalal Issa, also 30. He was the one who recruited Persson for the job. He drove him to and from the location and booked and paid for his taxi. He received 11 years and 10 months for aiding and abetting serious public destruction and serious unlawful threats. Then you had a 16-year-old boy who was also convicted of walking Persson through how to actually use the grenade. So you have a 16-year-old teaching a 34-year-old man how to throw a nade? And apparently he did all this over a video call because he was already serving a sentence in a closed youth care facility for a separate bombing. Dude. And that apparently only resulted an extra 4 months on top of the sentence. So, I mean, that is just crazy, the amount of privilege you get for just being a minor, even though you're teaching other people how to throw grenades into homes. Okay. But on top of those 4, a man who was already serving time for an unrelated weapons offense was also convicted of handing over the grenade that ended up being used in this attack. So he got an additional year and 4 months for all that. And then finally, there was one other person connected to the case, separate from those 5. He was acquitted entirely on the conspiracy and accessory charges against him. And I guess since Joseph had already reportedly been out of the country for a stretch before all this caught up with him, he was finally arrested back in December after spending time abroad. And as for the family who actually lived through this, their lawyer gave a statement afterwards saying, according to him, the family had hoped for harsher punishments across the board, ideally with everyone involved being convicted rather than just some of them. But overall, he said that they're largely satisfied with how the case turned out. Still though, I mean, satisfied or not, that does not undo what happened. I mean, this is an awful tragedy. Imagine just minding your own business in a house and then a grenade comes through. Like, that is not something that you would expect in a first world country. But the attorney also made a point of noting that the family is still dealing with lasting physical and psychological trauma from all of this, which obviously makes a whole lot of sense. But apparently Sweden has been genuinely dealing with a huge wave of grenade and explosive related incidents since around 2018, and it's hit both low income and wealthier neighborhoods. And apparently a lot of the grenades that are being used in these attacks, including the specific model involved in a chunk of these cases, trace back to leftover stock from the Yugoslav wars back in the 90s, which have apparently been circulating through the black markets for a few decades now. So unfortunately, when you just put this specific case into this broader context, it stops being some isolated freak event and just another incident that happened in a pattern of similar incidents. But going back to the actual point of this video, the part that makes it all stand out from normal gang violence is obviously the fact that Joseph was doing all of this while running a platform built around covering this exact world. Because it's one thing to just build a following reporting on gang conflicts that you're watching from the outside, and it's completely different that you're allegedly helping orchestrate the next chapter of that same conflict while your followers are watching a TikTok of you talking about the last thing that happened. I mean, this is just crazy. And I guess to be fair, like, we don't know exactly how much of his content overlapped with his alleged activity because all of his stuff seems to be wiped, at least from what I can tell. So I don't know if this was a way for him to make money or if this was used to send messages to rival gangs or something like that. That's not something that's been confirmed, so I'm not going to speculate beyond what's actually been reported. I'm just discussing on how insane this whole situation is. But I guess that's how a TikToker ended up getting life in prison. So if you're new here, feel free to subscribe, drop a like if you enjoyed the video, and I would recommend checking out this deep dive because this is also a crazy story. But I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.